Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Friday, the 11th of August, comes to you from London. And stock markets are falling globally on the war of words between North Korea and the US. So we're seeing a lot of volatility now entering. But the dollar is actually in bearish territory again, but realistically, on the short-term chart and the medium and long-term charts, of course, are still quite bearish. But realistically, we're in this range now, and the key thing is, will this low hold? So that's what we have to watch. And if we look at the euro, we are just emerging back into a bull trend. We've been very bullish in the medium and long-term charts for the euro, but again, can we go and make new highs, which is the converse of the dollar making new lows. Looking at Japanese yen, the dollar is falling quite significantly here, or yen is rising more accurately, and that's a safe haven. We see the yen rising at times of uncertainty, and so that we are seeing that stronger yen. Sterling against the dollar is still bearish. We haven't yet activated this downside target. We need to go to new lows to do that, but the charts are still bearish in the short term. The medium term chart is still bullish. So quite a mixed picture. Of course, against the euro, sterling has been consistently bearish, making new lows, and we've got downside targets as much as 10% downside. So and below parity, so we still do think sterling will come under pressure. Looking at the Swiss franc, we see sterling making new lows here, and that's mostly Swiss franc strength, again a safe haven. Against the Aussie dollar, up slightly. The S&P 500 index fell quite heavily yesterday, so we see here we're now bearish below the cloud. And the Nasdaq also fell heavily, so we're also now bearish below the cloud. Downside targets of about 2% further downside there. On the short-term S&P chart, we don't actually have a downside target. We don't have the selling thrust to produce that. And on the Dow, we see here we're just holding strong with upside targets still. So the Dow 30 has been more resilient. The Russell 2000 falling away quite heavily, and the medium-term chart also coming under pressure. So we are seeing small caps in the US under a lot of pressure. The S&P future is bearish, and here we do have a downside target of further 0.8%, and it's down again this morning, suggesting that we will see the market opening lower. And the Nasdaq E-mini much the same, downside targets of 0.9 and 1.3%. FTSE is down a further 1%, was off nearly 2% yesterday, so suddenly markets are looking pretty bearish. And the FTSE 250 also looking lower there too. The DAX also looking bearish, so we're seeing this market looking now very weak, and the medium-term chart is quite bearish, and a real sort of rounded top here just showing up on this lagging line on the weekly chart, but we are just seeing the DAX potentially going lower, another 2% downside there. Nikkei was a big fall off yesterday, closed today, and then looking at the Hang Seng, we see here we are now bearish here as well, and Shanghai. So all markets really have gone into bearish territory on the short-term charts. We see the Sensex, the Australian market falling off too. Brent crude was up at the start of yesterday, but fell away very sharply at the end of the day, down a further 1% today. We've got a target here of 48.34, that's 6% downside. So we've really hit resistance here on the long-term chart. Looking at WTI, much the same picture, bearish here as well. And US nat gas has actually risen quite strongly, probably storage numbers yesterday, so we are just seeing nat gas looking stronger on the short-term chart. Copper selling off as well, has had a strong rise lately, so just the last few days we're seeing that selling off too. Taking a look at some of the other commodities, if we look at coffee, for example, coffee has really had a big sell-off, down 3% at the moment, and we are just seeing that crossing the chart as well. Cocoa, much the same. So we're seeing quite a few of the softs falling. Sugar looking still pretty bearish. Wheat, big falls again and looking bearish. And corn, again, big sharp falls. So commodity markets just generally suffering. Taking a look at the gold chart, of course, gold has been rising, probably the major beneficiary of market uncertainty. and we're just reaching for new highs all the time on this short-term chart. The medium-term chart is bullish. Of course, the key thing will be to take out the June high at about 12.95, and we do have targets to that area, and then the long-term target's even higher still. So gold is looking pretty bullish. Silver also looking pretty bullish on the short-term chart, and starting to look a little bit better on this medium-term chart as well. US Treasury yields below 2.2%, so sentiment there is against interest rate rises is falling. Got quite a few downside targets into the low 208, 216, 213. So we're seeing quite a change in sentiment there on interest rates. Apple was down heavily yesterday, but still holding its bullish position. Google making new lows. Google's been probably the major tech stock worry, and Amazon also looking quite similarly worrying with a 6% downside target on the short-term chart. Facebook sold off only a couple of percent, so it was relatively resilient, but again, it has some downside pressure as well. And Microsoft holding up okay, but again, just bearish below the cloud with downside targets. So the picture is looking more and more bearish as this main story of North Korea unfolds. That's it for today. Have a good weekend. See you next Monday. Happy charting. Bye for now.